Eli Tanaka barely stepped into the school courtyard before a stream of icy water soaked his shirt, clinging to his skinny frame. The plastic bottle, emptied and crumpled, rolled to a stop near his sneakers. Laughter erupted. Phones rose like vultures, sensing blood. Chad Morgan, tall, smug, varsity jacket half-zipped, leaned against a nearby bench and let out a loud, mocking whistle. "Oops. My bad, nerd," he sneered, high-fiving one of his goons. Eli stood frozen for a moment. His glasses dripped, his notebook sagged in his hands, water trailing down the edges of his physics notes, ink bleeding into nonsense. A few students gasped quietly, some chuckled and others just turned away. No one stepped in. No one ever did. His mouth opened, a stammered I, escaping weakly before he shut it. That stutter, so familiar now, drew more laughs than sympathy. Someone behind him whispered, "Just talk already, freak." His shoulders curled inward, as if trying to vanish into himself. He didn't cry, he never did. Not here at Ridgeway High, where weakness was currency and his account was always in debt. Every hallway, every classroom was a minefield. Locker doors slamming inches from his face, sticky notes on his back, homework stolen, then mocked for being too perfect. Sometimes they called him E.T. for Eli Tanaka, but mostly because, like the alien, he didn't belong. He was the ghost in the halls, seen just enough to be a target, never enough to be defended. Chad thrived on this. He wasn't just popular, he was worshipped. Football star, influencer, and self-declared king of Ridgeway. He had a way of making cruelty look like comedy, violence feel like tradition. And Eli, with his hunched posture and two big glasses, was the perfect punchline. "Man, you should have seen your face," Chad laughed, mocking Eli's stiff expression. "Dude looked like he was going to short-circuit." More laughter. Another bottle came flying, and this one missed, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. But what no one knew, not Chad, not the crowd with their phones, not even the few teachers who sometimes looked the other way, was that Eli Tanaka wasn't just a nerd. Buried beneath the hunched shoulders and awkward silence was a storm. A calm, calculating force, one that had once moved with deadly grace in places these kids couldn't imagine. Places where humiliation didn't end in laughter, it ended in blood. And what happened next would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet kid in the corner. That night, Eli sat in his room, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows over piles of worn manga, physics textbooks, and faded tournament medals hidden beneath a layer of dust. His soaked clothes were crumpled in the corner, a reminder of yet another day he'd rather forget. But his fingers weren't idle. They moved in silence, wrapping gauze around his knuckles out of habit. Not because of injury, but routine, muscle memory, discipline, the kind you never unlearn. Outside, the hum of Ridgeway's suburban calm didn't match what boiled quietly inside him. He wasn't angry. Eli never acted out of rage. But there was a tremor deep in his chest, not of fear, but of awakening. It had been almost 2 years since he last fought, truly fought, and part of him had hoped that version of himself had died the day his brother was wheeled into an ICU. That maybe, if he buried it deep enough, it would never claw its way back. But today, as Chad's laughter echoed through his mind like a broken alarm bell, something cracked. Not just the usual pain. This time it felt different. Downstairs, his father coughed from the living room, the sound dry, distant, disconnected. Eli's home had been quiet ever since the accident. His parents moved like ghosts through it, present but unreachable, speaking in soft tones and avoiding eye contact. Ever since Koji, his older brother, was hospitalized during an underground fight Eli was never supposed to witness, everything changed. The dojo closed. His master disappeared. And Eli, the prodigy fighter with eyes like steel, vanished into this new life of silence, textbooks, and survival. He had sworn never to fight again. Koji's broken body was enough of a warning, but even warriors in hiding feel when the wind shifts. The next morning the school was buzzing. The video, Eli dripping wet, stuttering, mocked by Chad, had gone viral. Not globally, not yet, but enough for Ridgeway. It was clipped, edited, captioned with cruel text overlays like "nerd down" and "beta male meltdown." Even teachers had seen it. Some smiled awkwardly. Others pretended not to recognize the moment. But what no one realized was that for the first time, Eli didn't walk with his eyes to the ground. He looked ahead, calculating, observing. Every step through the hallway felt measured, not slower, but deliberate. like a soldier walking through enemy territory, not in fear, in control. The bullies noticed but didn't understand. They mistook it for shock, for shame. Chad smirked when they crossed paths by the vending machines. "Still dripping, nerd?" he whispered. Eli didn't flinch. He just stared, not into Chad's eyes but through him, like he saw the end of something that hadn't even begun. And that's when the plan started. Not Eli's, not consciously, but fate's, because Chad was planning something too, something bigger. He was getting bored with just pushing Eli around. He wanted something more theatrical, something live, something the whole school could watch. And Eli was just waiting, because the moment Chad would push too far was the moment everything would fall into place. It happened on a Thursday lunchtime. Ridgeway's courtyard buzzed with chatter and movement, the usual smell of fries, cheap pizza and perfume hanging thick in the air. Chad had been planning it since the night before. He and his inner circle, Jake, the loud one, Max, the camera guy, and Logan, who rarely spoke but always smiled when things got cruel, had rigged a live stream through an anonymous Instagram account. They called it Nerd Check, and today's guest of honor was, of course, Eli Tanaka. They cornered him near the bleachers, where the outdoor Wi-Fi signal was strongest and supervision weakest. Eli had just sat down with a protein bar and a copy of A Brief History of Time, the book open in his lap but unread. His eyes were already watching the shadows, the footsteps, the sudden shift in the air that always came before an ambush. He knew, he always knew. "Yo, E.T.!" Jake called, his voice exaggerated for the camera. "Phone home yet?" Laughter. The phone was already streaming. Over 20 students were watching live within the first minute. Some had joined out of curiosity, others out of habit. And a few, the worst kind, joined because they knew what was coming. Chad walked up last, holding a bottle of chocolate milk like a trophy. He made a show of it, shaking it slowly, dramatically. "Let's see if nerds are lactose intolerant," he said, and without waiting dumped it over Eli's head. The cafeteria roared with gasps and laughter, a perfectly executed humiliation. Sweet, sticky liquid dripping down Eli's hair, his shoulders soaking into the pages of his book. Someone shouted, "This one's going viral!" Another yelled, "Finish him!" But Eli didn't flinch. He slowly closed the book, wiped the milk from his glasses with robotic calm and stood up. There was no rage in his face, no humiliation, just silence and stillness. The kind of stillness that makes birds stop chirping, the kind of stillness that makes predators hesitate. Chad, momentarily unsure, tried to laugh it off. "What, you gonna cry, huh?" But his voice cracked ever so slightly. Eli's eyes locked onto his with such precision, such focus, that Chad instinctively took a step back, and that's when it happened. Eli moved. Not like a kid swinging wild punches or flailing in defense. No, he moved like water, like wind, like a memory of something ancient and sharp and deadly. In 3 seconds, Chad's legs were swept from under him. He hit the ground hard, the milk bottle skidding away. Jake lunged and Eli pivoted, grabbing his wrist mid-air, twisting it just enough to force him to the ground face first, with a crack of pressure and a scream that wasn't fake. Logan tried to grab Eli from behind, but before he could, Eli ducked, rotated, and struck the side of his knee with a palm so precise it buckled instantly. Max dropped the phone. The live stream tilted sideways as it captured Chad crawling backward in disbelief, nose bleeding from the impact. Eli didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He didn't say a word. He stood in the middle of the chaos, untouched, breathing slow, his shirt stained with chocolate milk, but his stance unshaken. Around him silence fell like a curtain. Then the phone buzzed. 1,000 notifications, comments, emojis flooding in. Students, teachers, parents even, were already watching the replay. And none of them saw a nerd. They saw something else, something dangerous, something real. And what none of them realized was that this was only the beginning. By the end of the school day, Eli's name was echoing through every hallway like a ghost with a new face. Not the quiet, awkward boy who couldn't finish a sentence, but the one who dropped 3 bullies in broad daylight without even breaking a sweat. The video spread faster than gossip ever could. Students who had never spoken to Eli were now whispering about him, some with awe, others with fear. But the strangest thing wasn't the way they looked at him. It was the way they stopped laughing. Even teachers who used to breeze past the bullying with half-hearted warnings now gave him careful glances. The guidance counselor called his name over the intercom, but Eli didn't go. He didn't need to. There was nothing they could fix that he hadn't already repaired himself, or broken in others. For once, he walked through Ridgeway High not like a shadow, but like a warning. That night, while others were still replaying the clip, tagging each other, captioning it with things like real-life anime, Nerd Gone Ninja, and Chad Got Cooked, Eli sat alone at his kitchen table. His hair still damp from the fight, a towel draped around his shoulders. On the table, a cracked photo frame. Two brothers in gi side by side, fists raised, eyes proud. His parents had never taken it down, but they never looked at it anymore. Then came the knock. 3 precise taps. He didn't move at first, but the way his breath caught for half a second said everything. He stood up slowly, walked to the door and opened it. Standing in the fading light of the porch was a man in a black windbreaker. Mid-40s, calm face, sharp eyes that had seen too much. His name was Master Renji, the man who had trained Eli and Koji since childhood, the man who vanished after the accident. "You've been seen," Renji said, his voice like a blade sliding from a sheath. Eli said nothing. He didn't need to. "They'll come for you now," Renji continued, stepping inside. "The old world, the underground. They never forgot Koji, and they'll never forgive you for leaving." Eli looked away, his jaw clenched. "He's awake," Renji added, softer. "Koji opened his eyes last week. He asked for you." That hit harder than any punch Eli had ever taken. He dropped into the nearest chair, breath shaky, as years of silence cracked open in a single sentence. His brother? Awake? After all this time? But the next word stole that joy before it could bloom. "They're calling for a return match. Honor demands it. Koji's injury. They say it left a stain. They want it erased. By you." Eli stared at him, heart pounding. "I don't fight anymore." "You do now," Renji replied, "or they'll come for him." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Ridgeway had ever thrown at him. And outside, the world kept spinning, unaware that the quiet boy who just made headlines, it was about to become someone they were never meant to see. The next few days passed in a haze of half-truths and quiet preparation. At school, Eli became a myth in motion. Some called him a hero, others a freak. A few even tried to get close, asking for tips, posing for photos, treating him like a sudden celebrity. But Eli wasn't interested in fans. He didn't want their approval. All he wanted was time. Time to think. Time to decide. Time before the past finally kicked the door down. He hadn't told his parents Koji was awake. He didn't know how. He wasn't ready to hear the disappointment in their voices, or worse, the hope. Because if they knew Koji was conscious, they'd start asking questions. And the answers wouldn't be the kind anyone wanted to hear. So, instead, he trained in silence. In the basement, late at night, long after the rest of the house went still, Eli moved through the forms he once mastered. His body remembered, even if his heart resisted. Each punch whispered memories, each kick carried ghosts. And when he finally hit the heavy bag Renji had brought over, it didn't feel like violence. It felt like coming home. Meanwhile, rumors grew outside the dojo walls. The video of Eli's confrontation with Chad had made its way beyond Ridgeway. Underground forums, fight clubs, places where people spoke in code and bet in blood. They recognized the style, the stance, the name. Tanaka. It had weight. It had history. And for some, it still carried a debt. Back at school, Chad hadn't shown up in days. Word spread that he'd transferred, that his parents had pulled him out after the video blew up, but no one knew for sure. His friends were suddenly quiet, scattered, avoidant. The bully throne was empty, but no one dared take it. Not with Eli walking the halls like a loaded question no one wanted to answer. Then came the envelope, tucked into Eli's locker. No name, no return address, just a time, a date, a location, written in clean black ink on thick white paper. Friday, 11:47 p.m. Dock 9. No spectators, no second chances. He stared at it for a long time. He knew what it meant. They wanted him back, not just to fight, but to prove something, to erase the shame they thought Koji had left behind, to remind the underground that Tanaka blood still had teeth. Eli folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket, and walked away. He had until Friday to choose between the peace he had built or the war that would never stop calling his name. Friday came like a drumbeat growing louder in Eli's chest. The hours passed with mechanical slowness, each minute stretching like old elastic. At school, he barely spoke. At home, he packed nothing but silence into a black duffel bag. Hand wraps, water, one old photo of him and Koji, and a pair of gloves that hadn't touched his skin in nearly 2 years. By sunset, he was gone. No note, no lies. Just a boy walking into the night, toward the edge of the city, toward a world he'd tried so hard to forget. Doc 9 sat under an overpass near the industrial district, abandoned by day, but not tonight. The air smelled of rust and oil and something older, sweat, blood, tension. Men stood in the shadows smoking, silent. A few women leaned against shipping crates, arms crossed, eyes sharp. All of them were watchers, old players, hungry for the return of a legend. At the center of it all was the ring, makeshift, roped off with metal barrels and chains. The crowd was tighter here, maybe 30 people. No phones, no streaming. This wasn't about fame, this was about tradition. Renji stood near the back, arms folded, his face unreadable. Eli stepped into the light without hesitation. Gone was the hunched posture, the hesitance. Here, in this place, his body remembered everything, and when he took off his hoodie and stood in his fight stance, weight balanced, eyes steady, 1 foot forward, there was a hush so complete, it was deafening. Then came the challenger, a fighter named Viper, older, taller, his knuckles wrapped in worn tape, stained from too many nights like this. He didn't speak, he didn't smile. He just cracked his neck and stepped in. There were no rules spoken aloud, just a nod from the ref, and then it began. Viper struck first, fast, hard, aiming high. Eli slipped the hit with barely a breath's worth of movement, pivoting on his heel and landing a body shot so precise it cut the man's breath short. Viper stumbled, regained balance, charged again. But Eli was already moving. He wasn't the strongest, he didn't need to be. He was smarter, more precise. He moved like a ghost made of muscle and instinct, every strike landing where it hurt most, every dodge just enough. Viper grew sloppy with rage. Eli didn't. When Viper fell, chest heaving, lips split, Eli didn't celebrate. He just stepped back, calm, centered. But then came the second fighter. Then a third, one after another. A gauntlet, a test, a warning. Each challenger came in with something to prove, and each left the ring limping, broken, breathless, until finally the last fighter entered. Not a stranger. It was Kai Renji, Master Renji's own son, trained in the same techniques, raised in the same dojo, but consumed by the underground and by the hatred that Eli had walked away from. Kai didn't want to test Eli. He wanted to destroy him, and in Kai's eyes, Eli saw everything: jealousy, pain, betrayal. This wasn't just a match. It was a reckoning. And in that moment, with sweat clinging to his skin and old ghosts circling like sharks, Eli realized he wasn't fighting to protect Koji anymore. He was fighting to protect himself from what he used to be, from what he could so easily become again. The crowd circled tighter as Kai stepped into the ring, silence folding over them like fog. He was taller than Eli, broader through the shoulders, his movements sharp and precise like every breath had been rehearsed. His eyes didn't blink, his hands didn't twitch. He walked like a man who had been waiting years for this moment, and he had. "I trained beside you," Kai said quietly, only for Eli to hear. "I bled with you, but when Koji fell, you ran. You don't get to come back and pretend that makes you a warrior again." Eli didn't respond. He just raised his hands, not in anger, not in pride, in readiness. The bell, a rusted pipe banged with a wrench, rang once. Kai launched forward like a bullet. His opening strikes were brutal, efficient, designed to break defense and confidence in one rush. Eli blocked the first blow, slipped under the second, but the third's a knee, caught his ribs hard enough to knock the air out of him. The crowd leaned in. No one made a sound. This wasn't a schoolyard beatdown. This was war. Eli staggered back 2 steps, recalibrated and re-engaged. Their styles were mirror images, trained by the same master, forged in the same discipline. But Eli moved with something deeper than technique. His pain was quieter, sharper. He used Kai's aggression against him, ducking under a hook and landing a counter elbow to the jaw, fast and surgical. Kai stumbled, lips parting in a snarl. "Still hiding behind control," he spat. Eli's eyes didn't flinch. "Good." Kai exploded again, faster, messier now, rage bleeding through discipline. They exchanged strikes so fast the crowd could barely follow. A sweep, a dodge, a spinning backhand that grazed Eli's cheek. Blood, just a thread of it, enough to wake something primal. But Eli didn't lose himself. He channeled it. He let Kai burn himself out, each strike blocked, each shout ignored, until the perfect moment arrived, and Eli stepped inside a hook, locked Kai's arm, spun behind him, and brought him down in a sweep that ended with Kai flat on his back, Eli's fist hovering an inch from his face. Everyone froze, and Eli didn't strike. He stood, breath steady, eyes full of something deeper than victory. Mercy. "I didn't run," Eli said, voice low but clear. "I survived." Kai stared up at him, chest rising fast, fury flickering, then dying. Because in that moment, he saw it. This wasn't the boy who disappeared after Koji's fall. This wasn't the quiet nerd who got milk dumped on his head. This was Eli Tanaka, the fighter who had every reason to hate, but chose not to. The crowd erupted, some in awe, some in anger, others simply stunned. Master Renji stepped forward from the shadows, arms still crossed, but his eyes, just for a second, softened. It was over, but it wasn't. Because as Eli walked away from the ring, the cheers behind him fading, the message ahead of him was clear. He could leave the underground again, but it would never stop watching, never stop waiting. And neither would the world that suddenly realized. The quiet kid in the hoodie had become the storm they never saw coming. The ride home was silent. The city outside the window blurred into streams of orange light and distant noise, but Eli's mind was elsewhere. Still in the ring, still hearing the clang of fists, still feeling the weight of every choice he didn't want to make. His knuckles ached, his ribs throbbed, but none of that hurt as much as what waited on the other side of that front door. When he stepped inside, the house was dark except for a lamp left on in the living room. His mother was asleep on the couch, a blanket half draped over her, the TV flickering faintly on mute. His father sat at the kitchen table, back straight, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug. He didn't look up when Eli entered, but his voice came steady. "Renji called." Eli froze. "I told him I didn't want my son dragged back into that world," his father continued, "but he said it was already too late, that you'd already made your choice." Eli stepped forward slowly, guilt clinging to his breath. "I didn't choose it. It came for me." His father finally looked at him. His face wasn't angry, just tired. "And when it comes again?" Eli didn't have an answer. The silence between them stretched. Then, quietly, his father reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout, a hospital email, an update from Koji's neurologist. Eli took it with shaking hands. The words blurred at first, but then he found the part that mattered. Responsive, cognitively stable, asking for Eli. He sank into the nearest chair. His father stared at him for a moment longer, then stood up and left the room without another word. Eli sat there, paper trembling in his grip, the ache in his ribs forgotten. For the first time in years, his brother was awake, and he wanted to see him. The next day, Eli walked into Ridgeway High a different person, not because of what the students now believed, or because of the fights he'd won, but because he'd finally stopped hiding. He walked the halls with quiet power, not pride, not arrogance, just certainty. The whispers were still there, the stares, but they didn't touch him anymore. In the cafeteria, Chad's old table was empty. No one dared sit there. A few students nodded as Eli passed. One even thanked him, a kid who used to get shoved into lockers just like he did. Eli nodded back but didn't stop walking, because he wasn't here for recognition. He was here to finish what he started. That afternoon, he left early with permission from the office, something he'd never done before. The school secretary didn't even question him. The bus ride to the hospital was quiet. Eli stared out the window, eyes scanning the world like it was suddenly different. And in a way it was. He stepped into the ICU with shaking hands. The nurse recognized his name and guided him to room 407. Inside, his brother sat upright, weak but awake, dark eyes wide with emotion. The tubes were still there, the machines still beeping. But when Koji smiled, it was like none of it mattered. "Eli," he whispered. And Eli, who hadn't cried since the day Koji went under, finally let it all fall. He crossed the room in 2 steps and held his brother like a boy who had carried too much for too long. No words, no noise, just two warriors who had survived the same war, together again. And in that moment, Eli knew he didn't have to choose between the fighter he used to be and the person he wanted to become. He could be both, quiet, kind, deadly, if he had to be. Because true strength isn't loud, it doesn't mock, it doesn't humiliate, it protects. And sometimes it wears glasses, sits in the back of the classroom, and carries the weight of storms in silence. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or silenced, tell us in the comments how you would have reacted in Eli's place. Your story matters too. And maybe your quiet strength is waiting to be seen.